Welcome to Congress in Context, your shortcut to understanding the latest from Capitol Hill. Today, we're taking a deep exploration into the bustling activity of the House and Senate on July 15th, 2025. Our mission: to break down the most important legislative highlights, the political dynamics, and what it all means for you. We'll cover everything from major spending debates to critical decisions on digital assets, even some powerful moments from the floor. So, let's dive in.
It really was a packed day. Lots of action, lots of debate, and it gives you a pretty stark look at the differing priorities within Congress right now. What's interesting, I think, is how these procedural moves and the individual statements, how they all connect to the much bigger policy battle shaping things. We'll try to connect those dots for you, help you see the bigger picture.
Okay, so let's start with the rhythm of the day. How did things kick off in the House? Sets the stage, right?
The House began with the Speaker pro tempore, Blake Moore, presiding, and he laid out the rules for what's called morning hour debate.
Ah, yes, that's when members often speak about local issues or honor people from their districts.
Exactly. It grounds the day in these human stories. We heard tributes to people like a 50-year 9/11 dispatcher from Minnesota, a police officer with 30-year service, also an innovative farm family, the Algrens, also from Minnesota, and sadly, a tribute to a young child, Golda Eisenbach, killed by a drunk driver in New York. It really covers a wide spectrum.
It's quite a mix, from celebrating service to acknowledging tragedy.
It is, and it's a powerful reminder, I think, that these representatives are connected to individual lives back home. But, beyond those personal moments, they quickly got into some pretty significant policy decisions and some quite contentious debates.
Okay, so after grounding things locally, what were the big-ticket items that took center stage?
Well, the main procedural action was House Resolution 580. This was the rule to allow debate on 4 key bills.
4 bills in one go. What were they?
First up, H.R. 4016. That's the Defense Appropriations Act for 2026. We're talking $831.5 billion proposed for the DoD.
Wow, that's a huge number. Does it include the troop pay raise?
It does. A 3.8% basic pay increase for military personnel, plus, big investments in R&D, procurement, operations.
Okay, defense funding.
Right.
What else was under that rule? You mentioned 4.
Right. The next 2 dealt with digital assets, which is, as you said, a really hot topic. H.R. 3633, the Clarity Act, that's the Digital Asset Market Clarity Act, aimed at setting clear rules for the crypto market.
Clarity, okay.
And then H.R. 1919, the Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act. This one aims to stop the Fed from offering certain services directly to individuals and, crucially, from using a central bank digital currency, a CBDC, for monetary policy.
So regulating crypto on one hand and pushing back against the potential government digital currency on the other. Interesting contrast.
Definitely. And the fourth piece was actually a Senate bill, S-1582, the Genius Act.
Sure.
So it's guiding and establishing national innovation for U.S. stablecoins. So another piece focused on digital assets, specifically stablecoins.
Got it. So a defense bill and 3 major tech finance bills. How did the vote on the rule itself, HRES 580, go down?
Well, that's where it got interesting. The vote on adopting the rule actually failed initially.
Failed.
Yeah, 191 in favor, 200 against.
So the rule didn't pass. That stops consideration of those 4 bills, doesn't it?
Temporarily, yes. But then a motion was made to reconsider the vote, and that motion was postponed.
Okay, so a bit of procedural maneuvering. It sounds like there's still tension around these bills, especially the digital asset ones.
Absolutely. The Clarity and Genius Acts are seen as really crucial by the crypto industry. They want the U.S. to lead in this space. But that anti-CBDC bill shows there are deep concerns, too, about potential government overreach in finance.
Okay, so that was the House drama. What was happening over in the Senate? You mentioned budget cuts earlier.
That's right. The big focus there was H.R. 4, the Rescissions Act of 2025. This bill proposed cutting about $9 billion from previously approved spending.
A rescission. That's basically Congress clawing back money it already allocated.
Exactly. Taking it back from agencies or programs. And the move to get this bill to the floor, discharging it from committee, was very contentious. Some argued it's absolutely necessary given the, $37 trillion national debt.
But others pushed back hard.
Oh, definitely. Warnings that it could gut essential services and damage the whole bipartisan budget process.
Were there other notable actions beyond those big flashpoints?
There were. The House, for instance, passed H.R. 1717, the Communications Security Act, aimed at making communication networks more secure, more reliable.
Okay, and the Senate. Any moments of agreement?
Actually, yes. A couple of unanimous agreements, which is always nice to see. They passed S-Res 322, designating June 2025 as National Post-Traumatic Stress Awareness Month and June 27th specifically as the Awareness Day.
Important recognition, especially for veterans.
Absolutely. And they also passed S-Res 321, commemorating 30 years of diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Vietnam, reflecting on how much cooperation has grown since 1995.
Okay, let's dive into the political dynamics now, because this is where things often get really heated. The Rescissions Act seemed like a prime example.
It really was. The arguments for and against were incredibly sharp. Supporters framed it as cutting wasteful spending. They used some, well, very strong language.
Like what?
They pointed to specific items they called spending porn, things like $5.1 million for what they termed queer global movements, $6 million for Palestinian media, funds for LGBTQ plus groups in the Balkans, voter ID, and 80.
So targeting specific foreign aid and social programs.
Yes, and domestic programs, too. A big target was the $1.1 billion for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, NPR, and PBS. They alleged political bias, questioned if it's needed anymore, even cited comments from NPR's CEO. The argument was, this is a win for taxpayers, cutting waste.
But the opposition saw it very differently. Cruelty disguised as policy, I think you said.
That was the phrase used, yes. Opponents stressed that $9 billion, while it sounds like a lot, is actually tiny in the context of the whole federal budget, like 0.1%.
But their argument was that even small cuts can have big impacts if they're targeted.
Precisely. They argued cutting public broadcasting hits rural and tribal communities hardest, places where those stations are sometimes the only local news source or emergency alert system. They mentioned specific stations, like in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, or on the Navajo and Hopi nations.
And that these stations even host emergency transmitters.
Right, for the FBI, the Coast Guard, vital infrastructure. Then there were the foreign aid cuts, slashing $400 million from PEPFAR, the AIDS relief program.
That program started under President George W. Bush, right? Huge impact globally.
Massive, saved an estimated 25 million lives. Opponents argued cutting it jeopardizes HIV prevention, hurts America's image, and lets rivals like China and Russia gain influence.
What about domestic programs? SNAP, Medicaid.
Yeah, critics said the cuts hit families struggling with food costs, added red tape for Medicaid, and could even hurt military families with special needs kids on TRICARE. And cuts to refugee resettlement programs, often run by faith-based groups, were slammed for hurting legal immigration support systems.
The partisan clashes didn't stop there, did they? We saw arguments over the economy, over how key departments were being run.
No, it spilled over into everything. On the economy, you had one side praising President Trump's leadership, saying he beat inflation, lowered costs, created jobs, pointing to real income growth and lower gas prices.
And the counter-argument.
Others pointed straight to a New York Times headline saying inflation accelerated in June because of Trump's tariffs. They argued tariffs are like a national sales tax, raising prices on everyday goods, and that real wages were actually down in June. They also hit out at what they called the Big Ugly Betrayal Bill, claiming it cut Medicaid and SNAP to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy.
And then the performance of specific cabinet secretaries came under fire, Homeland Security and State.
Critics were calling for Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem to resign or be fired. They called her policies disastrous, blamed them for FEMA failures during the recent Texas floods, stalled contracts, slow rescues. They also raised alleged fiscal issues, like a $200 million ad campaign, $21 million to fly migrants to Guantanamo Bay, and criticized her mass deportation policy.
And the administration's defense.
They credited Secretary Noem for activating resources quickly during the flood, so completely different takes. Meanwhile, at the State Department, the mass layoffs of over 1,300 career officials by Secretary Rubio were condemned.
Why? What was the concern there?
Critics called it a giant blow to our national security, arguing it weakens U.S. diplomacy and lets China step into the vacuum.
And even confirming nominees became a fight. Anthony Tata for that defense position.
Yeah, that was another flashpoint. His military record was noted, but serious concerns were raised about past controversial statements he'd made.
Like calling President Obama a terrorist leader.
That and advocating for a purge at the Pentagon. Opponents worried he would politicize the military.
And he's confirmed anyway.
He was. Despite the objections the nomination went through, it really shows how contentious even personnel decisions have become.
So let's zoom out now. We've seen these intense debates, especially over the rescissions, H.R. 4. What does this tell us about the bigger picture? That fundamental tension over the power of the purse?
I think that's exactly what it highlights. Who really controls federal spending? Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution gives that power to Congress, explicitly. But this rescissions process, where the president asks for cuts and Congress votes yes or no, some see that as Congress potentially giving away some of its authority, abdicating it even.
Haven't we seen fights over this before?
Yeah.
Like Nixon trying to withhold funds?
Exactly. President Nixon's impoundment of funds, Congress trying the line item veto later. These were executive attempts to get around Congress's spending power, and the courts mostly shut them down. So opponents of this rescissions package say it undermines that whole careful bipartisan appropriations process, the consensus building that usually happens in committee.
Sounds like a system built on trust and procedure, and these moves are testing that foundation. The stakes seem incredibly high: global health, security.
They really are. Take those foreign aid cuts again. PEPFAR isn't just charity, it's seen as vital soft power. It builds goodwill, alliances, creates markets for U.S. products. When the U.S. pulls back, China and Russia are often happy to step in. That can erode American influence. It brings that General Mattis quote to mind again. If you don't fund the State Department fully, then you are going to have to buy me more bullets. It shows that link between diplomacy and defense spending.
And turning to that other big area, digital assets, the Clarity Act, Anti-CBDC, Genius Act, trying to regulate a fast-moving frontier. It feels like D.C. is really trying to draw some lines now.
It's a huge challenge. Proponents want clear rules. They argue it will foster innovation, keep the U.S. dollar strong globally, especially with China pushing its own digital yuan.
But there are critics raising red flags.
Oh, yes. Big concerns about the sheer amount of money the crypto industry is spending on lobbying, and campaigns reportedly $245 million for the 2024 cycle. That raises questions about influence, about the effect of Citizens United allowing all that corporate spending. Is policy being shaped by money?
Beyond the lobbying, what are the policy concerns?
Consumer protection is a big one, preventing fraud. And then the whole debate around a central bank digital currency. Some fear it could become, quote, a CCP-like financial surveillance regime. Others see it as necessary modernization. It's really complex.
You mentioned the Texas floods earlier. That situation around the Guadalupe River, Kerrville, Hunt. It feels like a very real, very tragic example of how these abstract debates in D.C. hit people on the ground.
It really does. What happened there around July 4th was devastating. The river rising over 30 feet so quickly, destroying homes, taking lives, including Dick Eastland, the owner of Camp Mystic. Just terrible. But you also saw incredible community resilience. First responders, volunteers, groups like Samaritan's Purse stepping up.
And this connects back to the debates about FEMA.
Directly. It fuels those calls for investigations into FEMA's funding and staffing under the current administration. People are asking, are these potential cuts weakening our ability to respond when the next disaster strikes? It makes those budget arguments very, very real.
So, looking ahead, what should we expect next? These legislative fights aren't over, are they?
Far from it. That initial failure of HRES 580, the rule vote, and the fact they postponed reconsidering the rescissions bill, HR 4, it tells you these battles will continue. Reports suggest Republicans are determined to push for more rescissions.
Which could keep complicating the regular budget process.
Exactly. If these partisan rescission votes become routine, it could really erode trust and make future bipartisan funding deals much harder to reach.
And the economy will obviously remain a key battleground.
No doubt. The fight over tariffs and inflation, the long-term impact of that big, ugly bill on programs like Medicaid and SNAP, that's going to keep shaping the conversation and likely future legislation.
And globally, foreign aid, digital assets, these aren't going away either.
Not at all. How the U.S. balances engaging with the world versus focusing inward, how it chooses to regulate or encourage new tech like crypto. These decisions have huge long-term consequences for America's place in the world and its economic future. And those State Department layoffs, the contentious military nominations, they suggest a deeper rethink might be happening about how our whole national security and foreign policy machine is run.
Well, this deep exploration really shows how activities in Congress connect to, well, to your life. Whether you realize it or not, we definitely encourage you to stay informed and engaged.
And you absolutely can. You can find and read the actual text of these bills. H.R. 4016 for Defense, H.R. 3633 Clarity, H.R. 1919 Anti-CBDC, S-1582 Genius. It's all on congress.gov. That site is mentioned right in the official record. It's a fantastic resource for legislation, votes, committee work, everything.
And understanding how your own representatives voted, say in that HRES 580 rule that failed 191-200 initially, that tells you a lot about where they stand.
Absolutely. And you can always contact your representatives. Let them know what you think about budget cuts or education funding, immigration, digital assets, whatever matters to you. Also, keep an eye on upcoming committee hearings. Transportation and infrastructure, looking at DOT, Veterans Affairs on VA care, Ways and Means talking about making America the crypto capital. These hearings are where you hear the detailed arguments.
Okay, so finally, what's one thought for our listeners to carry forward from today's exploration?
Thinking about those incredibly poignant stories from the Texas floods. Communities pulling together, people singing hymns, even amidst devastation, showing such faith and resilience. It's a powerful reminder that even when Washington feels deeply divided, that spirit of community, of collective action, and human connection on the ground, it's incredibly strong. It can turn tragedy into something, well, something enduring. Remember that image. Little girls leaving the camp, singing hymns while they surveyed the damage. So maybe the question for you is, what stands out to you about the power of community, whether it's responding to crisis or trying to shape policy, especially when you think about the complex government machinery we've just been discussing?